The corpse was not there. It had disappeared. We were quite sure that we had buried it right there, and now we were in the middle of the night, desecrating the little grave of Daedalus, the poor cat of John's bitter neighbor. That day we were more bored than usual. We had nothing better to do, so we listened to all Andy's stories. People did not talk to him because they said he was crazy. There were even those who claimed the old man was satanic and that he had a pact with the devil. We cared little about the silly rumors taken from movies. Those rumors were definitely not true, but they were not bad at all. It turned out that he had witnessed a satanic ritual by accident. They always met in the huge garden of the abandoned mansion. As he spoke, old Andy's tired eyes set on a fixed point on the dirty and worn wood of the floor. He paused and took a deep breath. They had to do that labyrinth so the idle brats couldn't find the entrance to the house, where they did all kinds of aberrations with animals and even themselves. At that time, I had been hired by a real estate agent as a gardener of the house, so every morning I had to clean the things they had done in the night. After they made that maze, those stranger drawings did not appear again, much fewer parts of dead and mutilated animals. The old man stopped his narration. His hands were shaking, and before continuing, he made us promise that we would not tell anyone anything, and that no matter how curious we were, we would not set foot in that mansion. We certainly promised it, but by midnight, John and I had everything set up to pick up Mike from his house and get into the worst mistake of our lives. We were surprised that even though it was relatively on the way to our houses, we had never noticed that great mansion. How come it never caught our attention? Mike's eyes were wide, analyzing every inch he could to see beyond that nearly rusted gate. We went through a path of trees. The top of this closed above us, making our visit even more disturbing. Then, almost reaching the end of this corridor, we find ourselves facing the biggest obstacle and our first nightmare in that mansion, the labyrinth. In front of us stood with its thick foliage, tall walls made of nothing but bushes. The walls were at least 3 times taller than us. I could hear and see my gob as his Adam's apple going up and down. George, I don't want to ruin your little test of bravery, but I think it would be better to go home. Mike stuttered as his sweet scolded. His suggestion struck me as one of the best ideas he had ever had in his life. For the first time, Mike had an idea. I looked at him and nodded. But before I could say anything, John rushed inside. "Aren't you guys coming?" We walked for several minutes, and soon Mike and I started to get tired. It was past midnight, and we were sleepy, not to mention how strangely cold it was there. "Oh, come on, guys. Don't you want to know what's inside? We just have to take a couple of photos in there," and no one will ever call us losers again. Not even Tom and his thugs have dared come in here. Well, maybe it's because Tom and his thugs appreciate their lives, answered Mike incredulously. Maybe being a loser forever isn't so bad, you know? John looked at him, annoyed. Tom had bothered us since kindergarten, but John, well, there was a friendship between his parents, and no matter how much he complained, no one believed him, so Tom always took advantage of it to make the life of John a complete nightmare. He was his nemesis. I remind you that before he could finish, the three of us jumped in fright. Did you hear? Did you hear that? Again, in the bushes, something moved. We froze there, not knowing what to do, and then we just started running. I felt the air was so cold that it seemed to cut. I was running so desperately that my legs burned. I had no idea if they had seen the same thing as me. Among the bushes, although very faint, I could see the silhouette of a strange and deformed creature looking at us. I stopped when I felt my lungs would explode. I had been running for several minutes and my legs couldn't take it anymore. Did you guys see that? What the hell was that? I did not receive any response. I looked around and noticed I was completely alone, surrounded by those walls of bushes now full of weeds and thorns. The way seemed to have gotten narrower. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and walked, hoping to find the right path. The corridors became increasingly narrow, and from time to time the thorns tore my clothes and my skin. I kept walking for what seemed like hours to me. The road was very narrow and always ended in a blind alley. Desperate and shivering with cold, it didn't take long for me to start crying because of the frustration of not being able to get out of there. They will never find me here, and no one will ever even know what happened to me. Tears blurred my vision, making me stumble. I rubbed my eyes, and from there I could see a small hole in the bushes. I took off my coat and wrapped it around my arm to avoid the thorns, so I could make the hole bigger. I managed to cross to the other side. The path was wide again, and there was no thorns on the other wall. The end of this passage led me to a round area with a fountain in the center. I sat there to rest and wait for any of my friends to show up. John was the first and only one to do it. George, is it you? I can find Mike. We waited there for Mike for several minutes. He maybe had already managed to get out of there, so we decided to move on. Finally, after several dead ends and the occasional stretch, we managed to come out of there. Now, before us was the mansion. It was obvious that the front door was completely closed, so it was impossible to enter that way. Then we decided to walk around and look for an entry. Suddenly, we heard a soft sob, which increased as we went along. John and I looked at each other. It was Mike. "Mike, finally!" Mike turned around to see us. His eyes were red and swollen from crying. He closed them and covered himself with his hand. John was pointing the light straight at her face. "Sorry," he said. "Okay, now that Mike is here, we must leave." John was rubbing his arms, trying to warm himself. "My butt is freezing." I turned to see him and rolled my eyes. We were there because of him, and now he has suddenly lost interest. It was not that I wanted to stay here. It was just a situation that was very ironic. "Mike, are you okay? You're shaking a lot and haven't said a single word." Mike looked at me and started to sobbing again. I didn't want to. It was an accident. It crossed right in front of me. And I was scared." Mike pointed to a place on the floor. There was a small hole. John and I approached it. It was a cat, and it was dead. The expression on the cat's face gave me chills. Its muzzle was wide open, and its eyes were almost popping out. If he had been a person, I would have thought that this person had died of fear. John sighed, and then, after taking a couple of laps around the hole, he said, I think I know this cat. Oh yeah, it belongs to the old lady who lives next door." "It's true," I replied. "It's that of the bitter old woman." John decided that it was best to leave it there. Anyway, no one was going to know it, and in any case, it had just been an accident, according to John. "Well, now is the time to get out of here," said John with the calmest and most carefree tone he could. "No way, we're here. We have to enter, don't we?" answered Mike. I looked at him in disbelief. "You're kidding, right? You were the most scared of us at the beginning, and you even wanted to leave. And now you are interested in staying?" Mike looked straight at my eyes and just smiled. Again, I felt goosebumps on my skin. His grin seemed strange to me for a moment. You're right. Suddenly I've become brave and John a chicken. Isn't that funny?" John glared at him. If there was one thing he couldn't bear, it was being called a coward. He wasn't a loser, and he was going to prove it. "I think we can enter this way." Mike picked up a rock and threw it towards a window. Carefully, he put his arm in and pulled the pin of the window. "Done. Ladies first." John and I rolled our eyes, but Mike came in first, and we laughed. The light from our flashlights didn't seem to be enough. There was absolute darkness in there. After several bumps and trips, we managed to find a light switch, but as we had expected, it didn't work. "We should go out. It's impossible to even take a picture in here," I suggested. John agreed, but Mike didn't even reply. Mike had disappeared again. Great. We couldn't live without him. We walked to what seemed to be the entrance. The cold had increased and our jaws were twitching. We pointed our flashlights in all directions, trying to look for Mike. We jumped in shock when we saw Mike on the stairs, leaning on the railing. What are you doing? Have you gone mad? We have to leave now. It must be past 3 a.m. John shouted, already somewhat desperate. Mike laughed, making us bristle. I found a place up there where we can take the photo. Hurry up! And he rushed up the stairs. Let's get this over with, John said. The room Mike took us to had a direct view of the maze. The windows were huge, and moonlight flooded the room. Okay, selfie time, John said, settling in between the two and taking the photo. The flash blinded me for a moment. I walked to the window while rubbing my eyes, and then looking down, I saw Daedalus, the cat we had just buried, entering the maze. We have to go, I mumbled. What? John asked. Run! I took them both by the hands and we started running down the stairs. Once outside, I ran to where we had left the cat and started digging with my hands. What the hell are you doing? John asked, perplexed. Mike was just watching. The cat is not there. I saw him enter the maze from the window. That can't be true, he replied. It's not here. It's not here anymore. The corpse was not there. It had disappeared. We were quite sure that we had buried him right there, and now we were in the middle of the night, desecrating the little grave of Daedalus, the poor cat of John's bitter neighbor. You buried there. I'm sure. When we arrived, you were right here with the cat, John said, dropping the camera and shaking poor Mike, who was crying again. I took the camera and looked at the photo. That wasn't Mike. John? What? He yelled. You have to see this. I gave him the camera and he took it. That's not Mike. What the hell is that? It's me. We ran into the maze, screaming. That wasn't Mike. That thing had a rough and hoarse voice, and his face was distorted, just like in the photo. He chased us while laughing grimly. Suddenly, his body grew larger. His arms and legs were long and clawed. His eyes were two deep hollows, and he had a smile full of sharp teeth. The road was once again full of thorns, this time so narrow that it ripped my skin with every step I took. I never stopped running, not even when John begged me for help.